Welcome to the show. I'm Jim Flyzik. During today's show, we will discuss progress being made as we move forward with identity management programs in the federal government. With me on the show today are Jeremy Grant, the Senior Executive Advisor for Identity Management at NIST, Tom McCarty, the Director of Identity, Credentialing, and Access Management Program, Office of the CIO at DHS, Larry Hale, the Director of Center for Strategic Solutions and Security Services at GSA FAS, Paul Christman, the Vice President, Quest Software Public Sector, now part of Dell, Sam Chun, the Director of Cybersecurity Practice, U.S. Public Sector, HP Enterprise Services, and Tony Busseri, the CEO of Route 1. Let's get into today's topic. Let's start with you, Jeremy Grant. Talk a little bit about some of the things. Give us some examples of where progress is being made with identity management in your respective area.
Sure. Well, I lead a program that's led out of NIST, National Strategy for Trusted Identities in Cyberspace. It's a little different than most traditional government programs in that the government's not actually trying to build anything. The focus of NSTIC, as it's known, is much more on trying to catalyze a marketplace of different private sector identity and authentication providers that all of us in the country, whether it's me, my mother, my wife, my kid someday when she's old enough to go online, properly at least, can use to better protect herself in a way that's more secure, that's more privacy enhancing and more convenient. So it's been really quite a whirlwind of activity the last 18 months since the President signed the strategy in April of 2011. There's really been three key aspects of NSTIC implementation. The first is because we're trying to bring together a lot of different private sector stakeholders from really not only across the country, but even parts of different parts of across the world. We've needed to find some sort of a way to actually convene them together and start to think about how they might actually set standards and rules and a whole framework that could govern this identity ecosystem that the President's strategy looks to create. About 2 months ago, in the middle of August, we kicked off the Identity Ecosystem Steering Group, set up as a .org outside of government, but funded with a 2-year grant from NIST. We had close to 400 organizations, companies, universities, nonprofits, state and local governments, federal agencies, all show up along with about 250 interested individuals. We've got a community now of over 1,000 people working across more than a dozen committees and work groups to actually come up with this identity ecosystem framework, and there's more meetings planned throughout the year. Second, we've been very focused on pilot programs that can actually start to catalyze the marketplace with direct examples of the types of solutions that are actually envisioned in the NSTIC. In late September, NIST awarded 5 pilot projects worth a total of $9.2 million to a variety of, actually every one of the 5 awardees were all consortia of different entities that will be rolling out strong credentialing solutions across major banks, major retailers, universities, some government sites. We've got some specific focused ones around health and children online. And then the third thing has been working in partnership with many of the folks here at the table and others across town to ensure that the government can be an early adopter of the types of strong credentialing solutions that are envisioned in the NSTIC. We've made some pretty good progress most recently toward establishing a federal cloud credential exchange, essentially a shared service that could be used by all agencies to start leveraging not just credentials that they issue on their own, but also ones that are issued by accredited external providers.
Oh, terrific. Terrific. Sounds great, man. Working on the anonymity in the internet, which is always interesting. Hey, Tom McCarty over DHS. Tom, what are some of the key areas where you're making some progress over DHS?
Well, my role at DHS as the Director of Identity and Access Management, or the ICAM program, is to really coordinate across the department a number of programs that were in the past, a little stovepipe from each other, to be honest, right? So HSBD 12 is one program, e-authentication with another initiative.
You mean you just don't get everybody in the room and say, here's what we're going to do, and everybody
I
don't
wish.
work like that,
I wish. I guess I wouldn't have a job then. So, my job is to coordinate. So one of our highest priorities, since now that HSBD 12 is pretty much across the federal government rolled out, people have been provisioned with their identities and those credentials, and you see them everyone wearing them all around, is to start using them, using them for physical and logical access. So that is our highest priority initiative. DHS is in itself a very large organization, around 250, 300,000 employees and contractors, in a very diverse environment, ranging from first responders to borders and customs and people in airports. we're a federation, really, when we're a
Right.
federation within a federation, because DHS has to operate with lots and lots of partners, DOD, the public, people seeking immigration. So the big challenge is now fielding HSPD 12 for logical
Right.
access across that population.
Right, so we get the authentication piece done, now we can focus on the privilege that goes with the authentication and start rolling out applications that way. Paul Christman, how does a company like Quest, Dell, position to support the government in moving forward on these programs?
That's a great question, Jim. The real thing that Quest, now part of Dell, is helping our public sector customers do is extend from what they have to what they need to be. Both of the things that are embodied in NSTIC and FICAM and HSPD 12, all of those standards need to be adhered to or moved towards or adopted or adhered to. But the question is, how do they get from where they are to where they need to be?
Right.
One of the major things that we're seeing these days is a real transformation of the discussion with our customers, our clients, away from necessarily purely security and access governance and all of the attributes and functions that were put forward. We're now seeing a huge shift to cost containment, and it's a real different discussion to have with our customers.
Sure.
They're looking at what they need to do, and before it was, okay, we know we need to do this. Now they're actually moving to, how do we get there in a cost-effective manner? And they're looking at all of these objectives, federation, cross-credentialing, identity as a service in the cloud, and they're saying, oh, by the way, how can I make this cost less?
Right.
How can I take advantage of this so I don't have to build identities into every application, every particular website?
Right.
If they look at it from that perspective, it brings an entirely different discussion to the
Yeah,
table.
and I think that perspective is going to prevail here for the next several years as we go through these lean times with the budgets. I think it's going to be a non-starter to come up with a new idea that costs a lot of money. The idea is going to have to displace existing O&M cost. Larry Hale, how about over GSA? GSA plays sort of an interesting role. NIST plays an interesting role. GSA also in cross-cutting. Can you tell us a little bit about the progress you're making over there, Larry?
Well, thanks, Jim, and that's exactly right. I want to talk about two areas from GSA. One, as a service provider, as the Federal Acquisition Service or the government savings agency to help our customers get the services they need at the best possible price. Our U.S. Access offering, which can be found at fedidcard.gov. We've issued over 800,000 credentials, HSPD 12 PIV, personal identification verification credentials, to more than 95 government agencies, commissions, and boards. And in doing that, we've got, as a shared service provider, we've got tremendous economies of scale, so that the smallest board with maybe 3 federal employees pays the same price per credential as an agency with 250,000 employees. Government employees, federal contractors, using the credential. But the other view is GSA as an agency, as a user of the credential, and the tremendous power and capability that is inherent in that offering. Not only is it a tremendous valid identity management credential, can be used for encryption, digital signature, logical access,
Right.
physical access, with all that's behind that, all the security that's behind that. In GSA, we've actually used it to help manage our workspace utilization. So right now in the Washington area, we have offices in 3 different areas. We have Crystal City, we have offices downtown, and we have offices out in Virginia. And through a study of workplace utilization, using the physical access system where people
Right.
flash into the building with their credential,
Right.
we were able to determine that utilization of the office, because of today's mobile workforce, is somewhere between 30 and 50% at any given time. And so in doing that, GSA has actually developed a plan to close down some of the leased office space, move all of our Washington area employees into our headquarters at 1800 F Street, and save $28 million a year
Wow.
in taxpayer dollars.
Wow. Yeah, sounds like some energy savings and things like that there too. Tony Busseri over at Route 1. Now, what I know about Route 1 is focused on identity management and access control. Can you tell us some of the progress you're making in helping solve some of these issues with identity management?
Yeah. Good morning, or good afternoon. Excuse me, I should get the time of day correct. Fundamentally, what we're doing is extending the workplace beyond the walls of a building. And I think the role that we're very actively playing on the civilian and the military side of our government goes to there shouldn't be a security degradation when we extend the workplace for an individual or a contractor. And specifically, identity management is all about ensuring that you're giving, from our perspective, the right access and entitlements to the right person. Simply put, wherever you are around the world. And so we have been working with, by way of example, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and a number of military clients we have, where they've moved, whether it be HSPD-12 on the civilian side, or from a military perspective, where they're saying, we see the way we're delivering our service and where our people are going to be, that we have to give them those entitlements for it to be more effective, but we cannot take a security degradation. And then to echo Paul's comments about the fact that we want to do this in a more cost-effective way. So we have a program that's ongoing right now. I'll leave the client name silent on this subject matter, but they're turning in laptops and taking instead our device, where they're going to be able to use an internet-enabled computer anywhere around the world with our solution, and know that they'd have the exact same security. And it all starts with identity and access management, knowing who the person is, and providing them with the right entitlements.
Right, terrific. So get back. And so we talked about some of the progress we're making. Let's think of some of the benefits you really see coming out of here. I mean, it's great that we're all moving out, and it's great that we're going to get the authentication piece done, but what are some of the things you're looking at in terms of, let's start with Tom McCarty this time. Tom, what are some of the benefits you see coming out of these programs?
So in addition to HSPD-12, so one of the benefits are shared identity services. So one of the, I believe one of the more innovative things we've done in the last year is the implementation of cloud identity proofing. The E-Verify program in U.S. Citizen Immigration Services has an E-Verify system that is geared towards employers, and they rolled out last year a program called E-Verify Self-Check, which individuals can go online. They go through a cloud-based, commercial-based identity proofing series of steps to get their information on work eligibility. And I think more and more we're going to see those types of services in the identity and access management stack move to the cloud and be reused. So I think that's going to drive cost reduction and reuse across the department.
Yeah, I think the everything as a service kind of mood continues here. Larry Hale, what do you see some of the big benefits coming out of the programs you're working?
Well, building on that, actually, with the mobile workforce, having the PIV credential, having the strong identity management, the strong authentication, government employees are able to access their critical applications from anywhere. So we've got the role verification, the strong authentication, and the ability then to access their desktop, their drives, their critical applications from any location, because they're able to authenticate using strong identity management.
Kind of like what Tony was saying, moving that workplace back, but you lose no security when that workplace, it's kind of like me, I don't really know where I work, or when I work, or whatever. I kind of work wherever I am. But Jeremy, what do you think? Your program has the national scale here. I mean, so what are some of the benefits you see? Let's say short term for the time being. We'll talk about the future a little bit later in the show.
Sure. Well, just focusing on the government space, I think the thing that excites most agencies about NSTIC is the ability with a marketplace of credential providers emerging to offer better online services to citizens. Right now, I think almost every agency you'll talk to has got a few killer apps they'd love to move online, but they can't do so for the simple problem of 19 years after the old New Yorker cartoon was published, where the dog's on the internet.
Right.
And turns to his friend the dog and says, the great thing about the internet is nobody knows you're a dog.
Right.
That's still the case today.
Yep.
And almost every agency has got a few applications that they'd love to put online, but the data is so sensitive, the transaction's so risky, that if you don't know for sure that there's not a dog on the other end of it, it's not going to be online. And so what you're seeing now is a lot of excitement around NSTIC, along with, I do need to mention that in Larry's sister organization within GSA, Federal Identity Credential and Access Management, FICAM office that Deb Gallagher runs, There's great work going on to get a number of different private sector credential providers accredited through their approval system that you can suddenly start to use commercial identity providers to log into government systems. You're starting to see ones that are building in strong identity proofing. They're including multi-factor authentication. If you suddenly have a significant portion of the population carrying some sort of a strong credential that they can use to log into these government sites, it really opens up a whole new range of services as you start to be able to trust them online in a way that you just can't do in most cases today.
Yeah, right. I agree with you because there's a whole lot of things. I mean, every one of us that uses the internet, we see something looks pretty neat, but you just get a little bit nervous about, is this real or is this not? Is this another scam or whatever? So once you get that trust factor built in, it's going to make a world of a difference in applications.
And the one thing I will say is a lot of agencies are also looking at it from a cost savings measure. Right now, think about how much agencies are spending on call centers, on brick and mortar operations. This is stuff that, a lot of it's to support applications they haven't moved online yet because of the old dog on the internet issue. If you can start to move a significant percentage of those online, the cost savings can be pretty significant as you can take money out of the legacy support systems.
Right, terrific, great. Tony, over Route 1, what do you see as some of the big benefits or some of your customers seeing benefits coming out of the things you're doing?
Well, you just can't reiterate enough around the cost element. It's great to talk about security, but if it's going to cost more, it just doesn't fly in today's marketplace. And whether it be government or on the commercial side of the equation, it's the same type of thing. I think the other big benefit of having a strong multi-factor authentication approach for the identity and access management piece is that we get away from relying on policy. And one of our big discussion points quite often with organizations is when we expect human beings to be perfect, we inevitably create issues and there's vulnerabilities with it. And I think technology today, if deployed accurately and in the right way, actually does a very good job of reducing vulnerabilities. And when we go to this whole subject matter that we're talking about today, I ultimately think it's about reducing vulnerabilities. When we talk about national security interests, we're talking about reducing risk. And why we want a strong identity and access management program, again, it goes back to, are we giving the right entitlements and access to the right people? So I think what we're often talking to our clients about and why they're embracing the MobiKey solution that we provide into the marketplace, yes, we save money, but we're giving a better approach to reducing vulnerabilities and risk. And there's clearly laggards and leaders within government or business, but the players that we're talking with and we work with quite a bit are very progressive around the subject matter. And I often get, my last point, I often get asked and say, well, what's the industry doing? Where do they stack up against our federal government? And I like to point out that some of the best leadership is within Washington, is within our federal government, and that we should be quite proud of the things we're doing because business has different drivers, but I think our government here is, on a whole, doing a very good job of trying to embrace and address vulnerabilities with digital information.
Yeah, terrific. And my understanding is with your solution, you keep the data behind the firewall. Even though the machines are away from the office, the data itself remains with the same security.
Yeah, Jim, there's two principles we agree on. Is that one, you don't give entitlement or access till you're 100% sure who's asking for it. The second thing is we're kind of old school around this, and that data is best protected behind your wall. Why should it go beyond your firewall or your network perimeter? If you can give the same tools or capabilities to the user and that data stays where you've put the investment in to protect it, it's a better way of addressing the situation.
Right, and I would think that sets up for the cloud environment too as
Absolutely.
we move along. Paul, I want to hear from you on this question too, but we have to take a short break here. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio 1500 Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. I'm Jim Flyzik here with Jeremy Grant from NIST, Tom McCarty from DHS, Larry Hale from GSA, Paul Christman from Quest, part of Dell, Sam Chun from HP, and Tony Busseri from Route 1. We're talking identity management. We went to the break. I had heard from everyone except Paul. I didn't get a chance to hear from you before we went to break. What are some of the benefits you see coming out of these identity programs?
Well, I think that the biggest benefit that we're seeing from all of the frameworks, and Jeremy was talking about a coalition, and we was talking about an ecosystem. He was talking about partnerships, public and private. One of the things I think is great about these frameworks, these ecosystems, is the approach that's taken in a disciplined fashion to have the discussion. And we were talking before the program started about this issue being around for decades.
Right.
it is an imperative for us now to have a structured dialogue that allows us to take bites at a time. This is a tremendously complicated issue that is transforming with the technology, but at least now we have a framework for having these discussions, whether it's NSTIC or FICAM or HSPD-12. All of these mandates and the documents actually describe how we're going to get at it. And the FICAM 2 document that came out late last year really talks more about case studies and applications of the technology rather than all the bits and bytes. I think we're moving forward in a structured way. We're having realistic discussions about what we can accomplish, and it's because we're all agreeing on the framework and the way we're going to tackle this problem. Everyone's going to come out with different solutions to address different needs,
Right.
but at the same time, we're now having a structured discussion, and we can talk about what it is that we're doing, identity management, credentialing. Those are different things, and we now have a framework for having those conversations.
Right. I don't think we're ever going to get to a point where you have one solution, but I think if we can get to a manageable number of solutions and have different solutions for different niche pieces and different solutions, but nevertheless all interoperable somewhere down the road would be a goal.
And the federation and interoperability, you never want to get to a locked-in technology either from a vendor or from a framework, and those interoperability discussions are imperative if this is going to be a workable solution.
Right. Terrific. Larry Hale, over at the GSA, how about the challenges? Let's switch the discussion a little bit. We talked about progress, benefits. What are some of the hard things that still need to be done? Some of the challenges that you're facing every day to get where you're trying to go with this stuff?
Well, thanks, Jim. One of the great challenges is actually using the cards across government for what they were intended to be used for. So over the past few years, we've done a tremendous job of validating hundreds of thousands of employees and issuing solid credentials to them. But if it's just an ID card that hangs around the neck,
Right.
then that's all for naught,
Yeah,
essentially.
right.
So the White House has set cross-agency priority goals, and one of those cybersecurity goals is the use of the PIV credential across government for logical access and physical access. So that is obviously a challenge because procedures, processes, systems, and technology have to be put in place
Right.
that actually take advantage of the capability that they already have hanging around their neck.
Correct.
Roles and responsibilities. We typically have one office responsible for physical security, another office responsible for personnel security, and yet a third for IT and system security.
Right.
And those processes need to be integrated.
Sure.
Something as simple as taking a credential away from an employee or a contractor when their contract or their employment comes to an end becomes very critical.
Sure.
It becomes a problem across, or a challenge across all three of those areas.
Especially if it's an unfriendly departure.
That is exactly right. And that's not a problem unique to government. That's,
Right.
that's common across government and industry. And that, with it, that brings about the challenge or the cost of getting the right equipment, getting the right software, getting the capabilities to, for each individual agency to take advantage of these
Right.
capabilities, and then the greater challenge of the fact that we have a common credential across government and that we should be able to use it then
For all these other
between
potential applications.
between the other agencies as well, that
Right.
that I should be able to walk into
Right.
and be validated
Have
by.
Yeah,
Not-
reciprocity amongst the various agencies.
Not free access to walk wherever I want in the Department of Energy, but if I have a reason to be there, they're able to say, yes, this is Larry Hale, and he's here for a valid reason.
Look forward to that day coming. I have a feeling it's going to take some time, but we're certainly moving in the right direction. Jeremy, what do you think? What are some of the tough things? You got an easy job, secure the internet. That can't be that difficult.
Not secure the internet, just secure your identity on the internet.
All right, well.
But, you know, the notion of federated identity is not one that was hatched with NSTIC. In fact, it's been around for years. And I think almost every previous effort has stumbled because of the same set of barriers. For starters, you haven't had really great interoperability between different technologies. You kind of get halfway there, but it hasn't really been enough to really address what I think, you know, most IT managers would be looking for. Second issue has been usability challenges, particularly when you start talking about strong authentication. You know, I love the PIV card. I use it all across my agency, But the notion that, say, my wife is going to use that same technology, at least in its current form factor, when she's doing most of her online work these days on an iPhone, there's no place to stick the PIV into the iPhone. That and other issues with carrying tokens, I think, have certainly in the consumer space, the citizen-facing space, weighed down some of the success in actually getting strong authentication into people's hands. A third issue has been privacy. If I'm going to start trusting these different identity providers to let me log in across different sites, how do I know they're not going to track me every place I go? How do I know they're not going to turn around and sell that data to somebody else? There needs to be firm privacy rules if consumers, if citizens are going to actually start to get excited about it. And with that, there's some big concerns about liability. Nothing is 100% secure. Things do get hacked from time to time, even the most secure systems. Right. And there's been a lot of concerns about different players who've wanted to come into the marketplace on the private side. What are the rules going to be if something breaks? If you look at the bank card world, the credit cards and debit cards, we've got things like Reg E and Reg Z that basically apportion liability when something goes wrong. So, as a consumer, if my U.S. Bank Visa card gets stolen, I'm only liable for $50, and the rest of the fraudulent transactions are apportioned between the issuing bank and the merchant that was a victim of the fraud. There is no certainty that is sort of a corollary to Reg E or Reg Z when it comes to the identity space. And I think this all sort of wraps up around one very big challenge, which is the business model. Right. How are people going to make money in this? What are you as a consumer going to pay to have a credential? What are relying parties going to pay to authenticate your identity? What do the credential providers get paid along the way? One of the things we're really excited about within NSTIC is a couple of the pilot projects that we just funded last month are specifically focused on actually testing out new business models across not just government sites, but also some major private sector commercial online sites. And we're hopeful that some models emerge from that can really serve as a foundation for the rest of the ecosystem.
Right, terrific. Tom McCarty, what are some of the big challenges or hurdles that you're trying to overcome to get where you want to go with these programs?
So I think that the two big ones are culture change and a paradigm shift from enterprise worker at the desk, working at the desktop to mobility workforce. So in the culture change, we, again, back to HSPD 12, that's something that DoD has been doing for quite a long time. Right. And so you can see very readily it's workable. In fact, having U.S. Coast Guard as part of the DHS family is a great benchmark for us and great lessons learned. But it has to be, a technology shift that is, it's easy, it's not disruptive. So we kind of look at it as the coalition of the willing and the unknowing and the unwilling. Where we really depend on the folks that are willing, the folks that have that experience, the unknowing, the non-IT people who think of this as maybe another CIO mandate that they're wondering why they have to do. We take care of that through education and outreach and help them understand that this is about security, and in the long run it'll be about efficiency and ease of use. And then the unwilling will come along. So, really, again, that's a culture, getting, all the system owners, the business owners to really change their way of thinking, getting out of the mindset of, building deeper moats and higher walls and making sure that identity is really baked into the whole process. The other one, the big challenge is the paradigm shift that we're going through, right? So, we're evolving from an environment where, everyone's got a desktop or laptop and to an environment where in their home life they're not doing that anymore. Right. And we're in the workplace, trying to roll out things like smart cards, and as Jeremy said, our family's never going to have any technology, not likely to have technology like that. Sure. So I think the challenge is implementing where we need to be in security, but doing so in a form factor that that in the long run is just going to be second nature for everybody.
Yeah, terrific. Sounds great. Yeah, I'm glad you brought up that word culture too, because this is our 85th show, and we are now 85 for 85 on someone identifying culture as an issue that challenge that has to be overcome, because it truly is. When you're talking about any of these programs that are bringing lots of groups together, you bump into those issues all the time. Paul, what are some of the tough things that you're facing at Quest Software or Dell?
Well, I'd like to sort of pick up on what Jeremy was just talking about in the business model that is created when you're dealing with identities. He was talking about it in a public form where you have identities that are going through the internet. One of the biggest challenges, I was actually talking to a federal agency last week, and they were talking about their internal business model. And they were offering and trying to offer identity as a service back out to their agency consumers, the people, the line of business, I would call them, people trying to get the agency mission accomplished. And what they were running into was the funding model didn't have something that said, I have the need to create identity as a service, independent of an application or a mission. And the chargeback model that this agency works under for the IT cost recovery said, if we can charge for it, we can cost recovery, but nobody in the line of business was used to seeing a line item in their charge for identity as a service. They thought identity was it just happened. And so the culture inside needed to change to include this concept of there is a cost. There is a cost for identity as a service, and it should show up as a line item in your bill. That was a huge internal culture shift that the agency had to absorb, and it really will take some time for folks to think of it as a line item as they would an application. But it's very hard right now to get the seed funding to get a true interoperable identity management system independent of an application off the ground without the ability to charge back for it.
Tony Busseri, what are some of the challenges that you face every day that you're trying to overcome in order to get your identity programs where you hope to get them?
Yeah, I think the group's done a very good job of touching on the subject matter, what, broadly speaking, what the challenges are. My punchline almost goes to, quite often, we know exactly what to do to do the right things. It's the cultural impediment that doesn't allow us to get there. So HSPD 12, by way of example, has been around for a while. We know on the civilian side of the house, we do not have 100% adoption when it comes to remote access or the mobile workforce. And that change often is because of people's perspectives that it's going to be too difficult and do I really need it? Unfortunately, we're still hearing from time to time the concept, do I need multi-factor authentication? And so we're stuck sometimes with the fact that we're giving too much flexibility for people to decide whether the adoption is the right thing to do. I'm a big believer in HSPD 12, whether I'm going into a building, whether I'm going onto my computer inside the building, or whether I'm in Frankfurt, Germany, because I'm at a business exchange there and I need to get onto an application or a PC. The same authentication approach should cover me everywhere. And I really think, I think Jeremy or Tom had made the point earlier about culture being an impediment here. And I think sometimes we just need to get on with it. And while we're stuck not moving forward, we're getting bombarded with the commercial sector throwing out new gadgets and gadgets that tell us about we should be able to do whatever we want and have the data wherever we are. It is a darn tough thing to address BYOD, cloud computing with identity management today. Like, let's just get it done. Not an easy subject matter.
Yeah, it's hard to get people to move too. When you interview senior people, they all agree this is a big problem. We got to deal with this problem. But then to get the money and the resources and to move and actually get people to go, it turns into different sets of issues. I mean, people are thinking about, cost reduction and ease of use in the commercial world, stockholders' equity and things like that. And so, it's hard to move. This is something you have to do.
Yeah, to me, it's the paradigm shift, if I may pick up on Tom's comment, it goes to the fact we believe better security means more cost. I disagree with that. And I think the challenge is that's a belief from the past. And the players, the commercial players in the security space have an obligation to offer their consumer and government included in that tools that are cheaper and deliver better security.
Absolutely.
And they're there today.
I agree with you. I agree. I believe that some of the solutions that are out there reduce cost dramatically. My understanding, your solution is you wouldn't need to have all those laptops to carry around because you'd be using PCs wherever one's available with the product sets. Sam Chun, what are some of the challenges that you're facing with moving identity management programs forward over at HP Enterprise?
Yeah, I think there's not a huge amount of things to add. The main thing is that, again, we are entering a more physically austere environment. So our customers are looking for providers like HP to provide them with capabilities they've had in the past without the capital expense of doing so.
Right.
So a lot of the services that we're offering now are on demand through cloud enablement, so that you can make that transition between the real heavy capital investment of the past to more of an OpEx model where you're buying things on a more consumption basis.
Sure.
So I think that's one way.
And I think budgets are going to drive us that way too.
Great.
Tony?
One little last example, if I may. Route One's working with HP to provide a service to the U.S. Navy where it's the classic remote access solution, but using their CAT card versus the PIV card in this case. And I'll give an example. We had an admiral, a 3-star admiral, that was carrying around 4 laptops because he had 4 different seats, effectively on different networks or domains.
Right.
And by using our solution jointly, what we provided to the Navy, that individual got rid of not 1 laptop, but 4. And so the ability to have a cross-domain solution, leveraging a CAT card or a PIV card or a FRAC card, I think is the way of the future. However we're going to authenticate an individual has to work wherever we are on whatever seat we need to access.
Yeah, terrific. Good points there, Tony. Sam, there's a lot of discussion too about identity in state government, local government, private sector, federal government, and so forth. How are you guys thinking about this broadly in terms of crossing these various sectors, or as you're supporting your federal customers?
Sure, and part of our identity management practice within HP Enterprise Services actually spans all of the public sector, and that includes the federal government all the way down to state, local, municipal, and tribal governments. Mm-hmm. And what we're seeing a lot more of, and just last month, the state governments adopted something called SICAM, which is a very analog to FICAM. So you're starting to see that march out. And I think over time what you're going to see is very heavily regulated industries adopt the things like FICAM and the actual ID credentials first, then really flow down into the heavily regulated industries. And probably way down the road, you're going to see identity management becoming kind of a normal thing with higher levels of assurance than what we have today. But I definitely see that happening now from federal to state to municipal governments. That's on the move.
Yeah, I think so too. I think it's just inevitable now, the process as it moves out and crosses these boundaries. Let's switch over and talk a little bit to Jeremy. Jeremy, you're actually looking at beyond federal enterprise. How are you going to sort of like herd all those cats in there and get everybody sort of marching to the same direction?
Well, it's definitely a big cat herding exercise. In fact, that was the metaphor that was used when we launched NSIC at the Chamber of Commerce back in April last year. It was Leslie Harris, who's the CEO of Center for Democracy and Technology. When I asked on stage all the panelists who were speaking in support of NSIC for advice, she said, get a giant spray bottle and the largest bale of catnip you can find, because what you're doing with NSTIC is going to be an unprecedented cat herding exercise, and that's certainly been proven true to date.
Right.
But I will say, that's really what NSTIC is about. It's a government-issued strategy, but everything that we are focused on is how to engage with stakeholders at all levels, including other federal agencies, state and local governments, international governments, and gobs of different types of stakeholders in the private sector to try and catalyze an identity ecosystem that can solve some of these problems that we have. And let me just be clear that the problems are real. We're all using passwords today, and every year the cybersecurity problems that are tied to passwords get worse. The U.S. Secret Service does a great study with Verizon and several international law enforcement agencies every year looking at data breaches and really driving down into, how many data breaches did we have, what was the cause of them, what was the attack vector. Last year, 2011, 5 of the top 6 vectors of attack in data breaches were all tied to passwords and how weak they are one way or another, whether it was a brute force attack or just guessing that somebody had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which is still the case more often than not, dropping malware in somebody's computer, using a spear phishing attack. In total, 82% of the records that were stolen last year in this country were tied to the fact that we have this cruddy, outdated authentication system called the password that we're still using to guard most of our systems. And by the way, the number of Americans impacted by data breaches was up 67% last year. However, while it's a big national problem, it's nothing that the government can actually solve on its own. In fact, if we tried to specify a solution or do something like issue a national identity card or some other sort of token, we'd absolutely fail. There's simply too much innovation going on in the private sector, too many entrepreneurs coming in with great ideas every day on how to better secure and authenticate online transactions and manage identity. We'd be playing catch up. And so everything that we're really focused on with NSTIC, while you can call it a cat herding exercise, it's really about building coalitions between different stakeholder groups who haven't necessarily worked with each other in the past to find a way to start trusting credentials that are issued by different organizations and start to get people people toward some sort of multi-factor solution that can, if not solve every problem you have with passwords today, certainly raise the bar materially from where we are.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I believe in sort of the build it, they will come model too. Once you get some momentum going here, I think it becomes kind of a trust issue that people will say, I better get on that identity wagon there. If not, I may be seen as the weak link, or my company may be seen as the weak link, so you'll start picking up momentum as you move along. And I guess on that password thing, we're not talking biometrics today, but I guess somewhere along the way, biometrics enters the equation and so forth. I want to continue this discussion, but we first need to take a short break. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. I'm Jim Flyzik here with Jeremy Grant from NIST, Tom McCarty from DHS, Larry Hale from GSA, Paul Christman from Quest, now part of Dell, Sam Chun from HP Enterprise Services, and Tony Busseri from Route 1. We're talking identity management. We were talking a little bit about that coordination issue and coordination with federal, state, local. Obviously, we don't want a federal solution that's just for the federal government. We need to talk. Tom, DHS, I would think, being a large player in this with a lot of coordination responsibilities, how are you even going about trying to step up to that issue?
So just piggybacking on something that Sam mentioned with the SciCam recently coming out, it's a great benefit that the federal government laid this framework with FICAM, and
Right.
that we're all marching on the same page here. With the HISM program, the Homeland Security Information Network
Right.
program, that is one of our flagship programs to interact with state and local partners, both in emergency response and federal law enforcement. One of the things that we are addressing is not only the authentication piece, but is there a trust framework where we actually trust how that person in those organizations got that credential? How are they proved? What credentials do they have? What accesses should they have to information? And that works two ways. Another area with state and local, so our Science and Technology Directorate is working very aggressively on the PIV community and working with state and local organizations on rolling out those programs. So all this, all this is really going to rely heavily on NSTIC in the end. So we need to basically raise all boats so that they can, so that we can have a common level of trust and start focusing on the access piece.
Right, terrific. Larry Hale, how about a GSA? Are you looking across the other civilian agencies and how you're coordinating things you're doing with what's going on across, say, DHS and NIST and others?
Absolutely, and we work actually closely with DHS and NIST on initiatives such as the NSTIC, which Jeremy heads. PIV is a standard. It's not just a mandate for federal identity management, but rather it's a standard, and that standard can be met. It's not exclusively a federal domain.
Right.
So, although the U.S. Access Program was designed to issue PIV credentials to federal agencies and does so very efficiently, effectively, and helps our agencies save money, the standard can be applied to state and local government. We've talked about SciCam versus FICAM and how they work together. In addition, there are opportunities such as the Cloud Identity Exchange, which is vital to what I talked about earlier about accessing critical applications through the cloud with valid identification, with solid identity management. So we work with NIST, with the NSTIC, to promote those standards to help things like the Cloud Identity Exchange become reality.
Terrific. Panelists, we got about just under 12 minutes left, and what we really want to talk about now is where's all this going? Why are we doing this? I mean, what's going to be the big benefit down the road? What's it going to look like 5 to 10 years out? So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the vision for the future on a broader scale. What are some of the exciting future applications maybe, or exciting future things that we see happening as we go forward with this? Let's start with Sam Chun over HP. What's your crystal ball look like, Sam? What do you see out there in the future?
So, Jim, I have to be careful about opining about the future because 5 years will pass and I'll be back and I have to explain myself. That was right or
That's
wrong.
right. Well,
But I think what you're going to see is over time, identity management becoming a lot more actually mundane. It's going to be integrated into everything we do. I still remember in the old days when people's passwords were still password or had none. So I think we're going to make that march very slowly, but over time you're going to see a lot of this is becoming normal course of computing, and that's something to be really excited about because
Right.
the exotic things like remote identity proofing, privileged user management, federation, while they sound exotic now, but I think over time in the future it's going to be just invisible to most people.
Yeah, so I'll probably stop winning the lottery that I win every month from, I think from Algeria or somewhere. I keep sending them $100 every month. I haven't got those billions back yet. I'm not sure what's going on there. Tony, what's your future? Where's this all going? As the CEO of the company, I would think you need to be thinking about what's going to happen down the road.
I think we're in one of those windows right now where we're into massive change. And we had a window like this, obviously, back in the mid-'90s. Today, this is all about identity management. I think Sam made a really good point about eventually it should become just commonplace.
Sure.
But it's always the weakest link in the chain is what we're exposed to. So adoption of regulations, directives that have been put out there is a critical next step for our government across the board. HSPD 12 is a great directive. It needs to be applied right across, digitally, physically, logically. We can use all the cute words there, but it just needs to happen. The second part to this, which is really where I think the future is, and it's about how government interacts with the commercial sector. And so our expectations, we can talk about the energy sector, we can talk about the banking sector, but simple things such as, is ATM banking and online banking the wave of the future? I think most of us would say no, and that is where a weak link is associated with passwords. So when I think of the future, I'm not 100% sure what it's going to look like, but I know what we're doing common today won't be 3 years from now.
Right.
And that the thing that we strongly encourage with our partners within the federal government is to adopt some really good practices and directives that are in place right now. It's not that we're not smart enough and we don't know what to do.
Right.
Sometimes it's just simply doing what we know we need to do.
That's true. Just have a roadmap out there and just stay on that roadmap, and the technologies will change, things will change. But as long as we're moving in that common direction over time, things at the other end will work themselves out. Larry Hale, what's it look like for you, Larry, as you think about the longer term here? Where's this all going?
Well, to me, interoperability is the key, Jim. Our agencies, our customers, our government employees want to focus on their mission, and they want to be able to do their mission without having to worry about identity management and how do I get back into my system. We're working with the Intel community's information sharing environment to attach back-end attributes. It sounds technical, but it allows the credential to verify roles and responsibilities so that you can have a more robust access control from any device, as we were talking about earlier, from any device in any place, by allowing that roles and responsibilities to be attached to the credential on the card. That's important because that mobility, that interoperability is the key to doing things like I said earlier about reducing the physical footprint of government, not paying to power up and light and lease space that's not being used. Reduce that footprint, save the taxpayer dollars, and allow people to focus on their mission wherever they are.
Yeah, terrific. Well said, Larry. I like that. Paul Christman, what do you see as you're thinking about where this is going down the road, trying to stay ahead of that curve, and stay ahead of the technology trends?
Yeah, there's three areas that I'd say that I can see in the future. One, I think, is the blending of the public and private identity. We have identities at work, we have systems access at work, and then we have our private lives. I think going forward, we're going to see a common credential that's going to work across the public and private. Second, I think people are going to become more comfortable with the simple but necessary strong authentication on some sort of device. Software tokens rather than hardware tokens for two-factor authentication. It's going to become embedded in the devices that we carry with us. Mobility is assumed, and so we're going to have some sort of strong authentication software that's in the device that's not dependent on a physical piece of whatever, plastic, silicon, or whatever. And the third is, I think we're going to find a way to quickly turn on or turn off rights to systems and the privileges that are associated with your credentials very, very quickly. access to buildings was mentioned earlier.
Sure.
I think you're going to be able to get temporary grant to access a building maybe for a project, and then it's going to be turned off. But that ability to turn on and turn off rights or privileges, whether it's physical or logical or technical,
Right.
all of those things are going to become much more fluid and expected that when I show up in Idaho Falls, I do have access to the buildings there. And
Right.
when I leave Idaho Falls, I no longer have access to the
Right,
buildings.
Right, it's going to be real-time world.
It's going to be a
Things-
real-time,
things
fluid
happening in
world.
Real-time. Tom McCarty, as you're thinking about this stuff, what do you see down the road? What do you see out there in the future? Where's it all going?
So when I think about the future, I first think about, well, what's happening in the consumer world. What is the next generation going to become used to that they need to that we need to accommodate in the enterprise? When I bought my last smartphone, I went into the Verizon store and I asked the sales guy for if any of the phones had near-field communications, and he looked at me kind of strange and said, "What's that?" And he went back to the back and asked a manager and came out with one device that had it. And,
Right.
and so I was looking for that because I can see a world where I'm not carrying around a wallet full of credit cards.
Right.
I could actually use the device that I use to navigate, to communicate, to actually do e-commerce. Bringing that back to the enterprise, I'm very interested in the work that NIST is doing on derived credentials. I think having a different, the same level of assurance credential on a different form factor, moving from the plastic to something like the phone
Right.
is a wave of the future.
Yeah, terrific. Well said. I like these ideas. Jeremy, where's it all going, buddy? Where do you see this stuff out there in the future?
I think there's really two trends that jump out. I think the first is going to be the erosion of what a friend of mine, Ian Glazer, who's a great analyst over at Gartner, calls the company town mentality. Somebody actually talked about it in an event the White House did on NSTIC back in May. Where he used the analogy of the company town to talk about, in the olden days, the company would build the factory, they'd build the houses, they'd build the school, they'd build the general store, they'd build the doctor's office. And, we've moved away from that, as it turns out that workers can figure out a lot of these things for themselves. You don't need the company to provide everything. But organizations today on the internet are generally treating their customers through the old company town model when it comes to identity. We need to provision some sort of a credential or an identity to you. We need to be the ones who make that determination. And, his point was that's quaint and outdated, and we're going to start to move away from it over the next few years and actually start to be willing to see major enterprises, really in both government and the private sector, start to trust other credentials,
Right.
let people essentially bring their own identity. This is something that was echoed by the chief identity architect for eBay and PayPal, who basically said, they think this whole notion of issuing their own credentials is absolutely quaint and outdated and will be, just a fantasy 5 years
Right.
from now. The second thing, just to play off of what Tom and Paul was talking about, is the impact of mobility, and particularly smartphones.
Right.
When I go back to my days in industry trying to build some of the early smart card-based solutions, one of the biggest barriers was always, man, how are we going to get these people a card, and how are we going to make sure they carry it with them all the time? And, as I think I was telling you before the show, I got dressed this morning in the dark so as not to wake my wife and kids. I managed to forget my wallet, so I don't have my cards with me.
Right.
But I managed to grab my smartphone on the way out. You're seeing that more and more these days. And as Tom's talking about with NFC and some of the work NIST is doing with derived credentials, I said earlier, I don't think my wife's ever going to carry a PIV card, but that's not to say that she wouldn't take the same functionality as a PIV and have it embedded in her smartphone and use that someplace as a model for getting authentication online. The fact that we're all carrying these devices with us right now and tend not to leave the house without them,
Right.
and that they have all this tremendous power, I think is really going to be a game changer that smashes through that old barrier of how do you get a token in somebody's hands and hope that they bring it with them. And so, we think, certainly in the commercial market, that is where the most exciting work is going on, and we're, really, frankly thrilled to see it. We're going to see a great foundation for the identity ecosystem based around that in the future.
Terrific. Well said, man. And I agree with you with the, I know when the kids get into the workplace, these devices better have work easily and have utilities on them, because they're going to have the expectation that they're there. And you're right. If you leave home now and you forget your smartphone, you panic. And you go back a few years, we didn't even have these devices. But let me try to do a couple real quick summary here in the last minute or so. One thing that came across loud and clear is there's an awful lot going on. An awful lot of things going on. We got pilots all over the place. We're moving fast. There's things going on. The other thing, benefits, is in the area of shared ID services. access from anywhere, the ability to have the same security, whether you're at your office or you're on the road or you're somewhere else in the world, it will become important. And it is possible to drive costs down. With some of these solutions, you can drive costs down significantly and add, while at the same time adding some functionality. I think what came across here is what we're looking at is better services to the citizens. I mean, what it's all about is actually improving the services that are going to be available. The challenges are out there. There's the cross-agency goals, coordination, the big culture issue, which is alive and kicking just about everything we do with technologies. But seeing identity more as a service or moving more towards a service model is also. I think Jeremy brought up the fact, or someone did, that the business model is going to have to be worked out also. How will these business models work as we work this thing out and it proliferates across federal, state, local, and the private sector? And finally, in terms of identity, I guess if we think about it in the long run, if you can get the authentication and the privilege piece down for people, you can broaden identity. Think about identity of things, being positively able to trust devices and things. Nodes on networks, devices on networks, bits themselves, identification of good bits and bad bits. And if we can get to that point, I think we haven't even scratched the surface of some of the applications that we'll see in the future if we can get the identity foundation in place, which I think is the critical piece that needs to be in place to explode a whole new world of opportunities that will dramatically improve services and the livelihood for many, many people. One thing we're sure of is, despite the arguments in Washington, D.C. about directions and political issues and so forth, cybersecurity remains a hot topic right across the board. There's no disagreement that we need to keep moving in these areas. So with that, I first want to thank our panelists for taking time from their busy schedules to come out here and share your ideas with us. Thanks to the sponsors for doing